Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Pair Program. I'm your host, Tim Winkler, joined by my co-host, Mike Gruen. Mike, what's going on? How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm good. I wanted to play a quick game with you here. I gave you a little heads up on it, but I'm going to run it by you here. So my wife and I, over the weekend, we took a road trip, and we're talking about some of our past pairings, and one that came up was the road trips and car snacks. So here's the game. So if you're on a long road trip and you stop out at a gas station to fill up, you're heading into the store, load up on snacks, drinks for the next leg of the trip. You only had a $10 budget. What's on that list of items that you're grabbing without exceeding $10?
Jerky, beef jerky of some sort.
Okay, well that's expensive. So you're gonna.
I think I just hit $9 right there, and then maybe, and maybe if I can get a cheap cup of coffee or something, depending on what time of day it is, or some sort of drink. But jerky is just
a jerky man.
Yeah, okay. I mean for a road trip, yeah.
Okay, I'm going peanut M&Ms, small bag of Doritos, like the purple bag, the sweet and spicy chili, Red Bull, and a bottle of water. So
nice. Fully support the peanut M&Ms.
Yeah, peanut M&Ms are key.
Yeah, I mean chocolate, peanut butter, a little protein, a little sweetness.
Yeah, that's right. All right, good times. All right, let's give our listeners a preview of today's episode. So today we're going to be talking about the final frontier, space, a topic that I'm personally a big fan of. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will appreciate this episode. Specifically, we're going to be talking about SpaceTech as a vertical, dissecting how two innovative startups are kind of pioneering in the industry. So for today's discussion, we've looped in two guests that are joining us from two SpaceTech startups. We have Ben Reed, who is the co-founder and CTO of Quantum Space. Also notably worked directly with NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center for a number of years, and Derek Strobel, the lead software engineer for Kayhan Space. Also like to highlight that Derek was the first employee hired at this early stage startup. So Ben and Derek, thank you both for joining us on the Pair program.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
Excellent. Thanks for having us. Good stuff. All right. Now, before we dive into the discussion, we do like to kick things off with a fun segment called Pair Me Up. This is where we will go around the room and kind of spitball a couple of our favorite pairings. Mike, you kick us off. What do you got for us today?
So today's is anxiety and courage. Sort of having to get over that anxiety and the courage to do it and things like that. It's somewhat personal. My son went off to Boy Scout camp recently. Was very nervous about it because it's a pretty chaotic scene, and dealt with it and got over it, and turned out to be a great trip. So it was sort of inspiring, just sort of remembering that like anxiety is fine. It's what's that's fine, and then the courage to get over it. So that's my pairing.
Cool, I dig that. How long was he gone for?
A week, and it's a trip he's done several times, but there's a lot of sleep deprivation, and because it's Boy Scouts, they're sort of responsible for themselves and doing a lot of things, and so it's the anxiety of like not having to be responsible for getting every single thing done himself, and maybe relying on some of the other guys in the troop to pull their weight sometimes. So that's
nice.
Yep.
It's I speak to a lot of school groups, and I tell a personal story where I've taken pretty big career steps in my career, and was not qualified for any of the steps when I took them. Mm-hmm. But if you and that made me a little bit of imposter syndrome, and by a little bit I mean a lot. But I always advise these school age kids that in your life you need to be comfortable with being a little afraid. You need to be okay with having a little anxiety, because if you're completely qualified for the very next step in your career, well, how big of a step is that? Right? That if you really want growth, you need to be able to go for those quantum leaps, which is actually part of where the name of my company comes from. You have to be comfortable with being a little uncomfortable. And that's sometimes hard for them to grasp, but I think it's an important concept to get across early on in young people's minds.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I've been reading a book called Mindset too. It's kind of positioning yourself in that growth mindset versus fixed mindset, where growth mindset, it's okay to make mistakes because you learn from them, you grow from them. Whereas fixed mindset, you come down on yourself really hard and you feel ashamed. And so it's good to hear that from you, Ben. I'd also say, anxiety sometimes and bourbon could also be a pairing as well. Not for Boy Scouts, you got to be of age, and we don't advocate all of that for the youth. All right, I'll jump in now. So I'm gonna go with the chiropractor and euphoria. So I saw a chiropractor for the very first time recently. I've never been to one before. I've always heard mixed reviews from folks on chiros, like, getting adjustments, that some horror stories, some amazing stories. So I had some lower back pain for a few months. I thought I'd give it a try. And I had no idea how the equipment all worked. But, for those that have never experienced this before, I'll paint the picture for you. So they kind of lay you out on a table. They call it a drop table. It's got these adjustable sections that use hydraulics to kind of raise or lower different sections to target different sections of your spine. And they use this to perform like adjustments. So, haven't never seen one before. I don't regularly crack my back or my neck. So I can just tell you that this woman cracked the hell out of my body, and it felt incredible. And so it was only about 15 minutes, but afterwards I stood up, and they can only describe this feeling as euphoric. So I have signed up for a few, ongoing adjustments the next few months. I'll be sure to kind of give a follow-up review and see if it's still serving as that same descriptor. But have either of you all been to the chiropractor before?
Sounds kind of scary, to be honest.
Yeah.
What you just described, I think I'm a little less likely now, despite the euphoric.
I had an uncle who went, and he became like addicted to it. So I've been hesitant.
You're not helping my case, Mike. That just
no, I'm not trying to help your case. I'm hesitant to go too.
I had lower back pain for a while, and I found out that my problem was a lot simpler because I was just spending too much time in my chair. So I got to get out of that problem without having to. The only expensive equipment I needed was my own legs.
There you go. Yeah. Standing desk is also helpful.
Yeah.
All right. Good stuff. Well, let's go ahead and pass it on to our guest now. So Derek, why don't you give us a quick intro and then tell us your pairing?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Derek Strobel. I'm the lead software engineer at Kayhan Space, as Tim introduced me. So I've been working in spaceflight safety software for about 5 years now, and just looking forward to, continuing doing that here at Kayhan Space with all that we're doing. So thanks for having me. And my pairing today, so I'm a new homeowner actually this year, first time homeowner. So my pairing is gardening related. So it's actually, and I also brought props. So my pairing is eating blueberries from my own garden. And this hat that I bought that makes me feel like a little farmer.
Hey,
nice.
Isn't that fun? I just walk around my yard, picking blueberries, eating them right off the bush. What you can do better than that?
That's fantastic.
Nice. That is fantastic.
What else are you gardening out there? What are you growing?
Yeah, I mean, it's our first year growing stuff, so there's not a ton. We have like one big raised bed. So we've got tomatoes, obviously, the quintessential summer veggie. Which are still all green, but I'm really looking forward to eating one. We grew some cilantro, which I immediately messed up and has since bolted and flowered. Live you learn. Some brassicas. So going to be expanding our garden a lot next year for sure.
Nice.
Cool. Good stuff. Yeah, I've always found like gardening or getting out the yard like that's therapeutic too. It's like a good way to just burn off some stress as well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And bonus points too. That's the first time we've had props introduced. So
yeah.
Trailblazing, Derek. I love it.
Trendsetter.
Awesome. All right, good stuff. Let's pass it along to our next guest, Ben. Quick intro from yourself and your pairing.
So intro for myself, father of 4 kids, 4 fabulous kids. Been married 32 years, just coming October. I know it's impossible for somebody who looks as young as I do to be married that long. Back a decade ago, about somewhere around 2010, my wife said that to help out a friend who was running an animal shelter, we should foster puppies for them. So we just hold on to the puppy that's going to be put down in a high kill shelter. We hold on to them until somebody else reviews the application. Thankfully, that wasn't me or us. Sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a few months until they're adopted to a forever home. So from 2010 to 2020, with the pandemic kind of altered things a little bit, we fostered about 120 dogs coming through our house.
Wow.
So that was sometimes stressful, but on the balance, it was fabulously rewarding, and it was great for my 4 kids growing up to go through that experience to take care of things more helpless than them. So my pairing is puppies and laminate flooring.
Well played.
You do not want hardwoods. You do not want carpet. You want laminate flooring. Fabulous to clean up. So that's my pairing for the day.
Nice.
Wow. That's
a
phenomenal.
strong pairing.
Wise choice. Well played. Well played. 120 dogs. That's incredible.
So it also teaches your kids to let things go.
Yeah,
which is a good lesson.
Yeah, I'll tell you, not to make this podcast about that, but I'll tell you, the people often ask me, how did you let them go? We had 2 dogs of our own. One was a foster fail, and one was ours beforehand. And so we had to. The vast majority of people adopting were going from 0 to 1, or sometimes 0 to 2. And so to see the joy that the dog would bring into their lives, it made turning them over so much easier. If it was a black wall and I didn't get to have the experience of seeing their faces light up, it would have been a lot harder. But to see the joy that the puppies were bringing them, it made turning them over not always easy, but incredibly rewarding.
Awesome.
That's great. So you all didn't ever adopt your own in the house? Just one?
Yeah, just one. We had a little guy about 15 pounds who went deaf because of parvo when he was in a kennel before coming to us. Huh. It was a little bit harder to place, and so we kept the little guy, and we still have him today. That little guy's name is Nathan. Uh-huh. So Nathan is still with us today.
Oh, nice.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
good stuff. Awesome. Well, I love it. It's a good round. Let's keep things rolling here. Transition into the main topic. So, like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about navigating the space tech industry and kind of hearing this firsthand from our guest. Some of these different use cases with how technology is innovating in the space. Discuss some of the unique challenges that startups and commercial companies face when pioneering in the space. Talk a little bit about this shift in the space tech market from government backed to commercial backed. And then for those listeners who are curious or interested in exploring opportunities in the vertical, we'll cover hiring and navigating a career in the space tech industry. So a lot to get to. Why don't we have Ben, you kick us off and maybe first give us a little bit of background and context on the work that Quantum Space is doing, some of these problems that you're solving. And then we'll do the same with you, Derek, on Kayhan. But let's start with you, Ben.
Sure. So my career was 22 years with NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, just outside of DC. I took a rotational assignment to the White House and spent a little time in the White House on the National Space Council staff back in 2018. And then in 2020, about the same time that I was getting out of the dog fostering business, I was ready for some new challenges. And so I decided to leave the government, and I joined up with a gentleman by the name of Cam Gafarian, and he and I co-founded Quantum Space. So we are a company founded on the belief that as humanity expands outward from the Earth to low Earth orbit, the geosynchronous orbit, and further out towards the moon, that there is opportunity for a company like Quantum to provide essential services, communication services, position, navigation, and timing, transportation services. We can give people a ride to that orbit. We can also host their payload on our spacecraft, both in geo and in cislunar space, out by the moon. And we feel that we bring a tremendous value to our customers with the experience that we bring in that space. All activities in space are difficult, but the further away from you go from the Earth, the difficulty goes up non-linearly. And so anything above the GPS constellation makes navigation much, much harder. Communication gets more difficult. So we're out there tackling those hard problems, and we look forward to helping our customers do their missions more efficiently and more effectively with the services that we can provide them.
Very cool. And so it's just a couple of years old. I guess how many employees and any funding to this point, and to what amount?
So we are a year and a half old. We started January of 21. We're about 35 or so full-time employees. With part-time and interns, it's, I don't know, closer to 45 maybe. Our Series A is complete and oversubscribed, so our funding is solid. No issues there. And we are continuing to make progress on our plans.
Cool. Love it. Right there in our backyard. Is it Rockville, your headquarters?
Rockville, Maryland, just outside the DC Beltway.
Excellent. Awesome. Derek, how about a little bit more background on Kayhan?
Yeah, for sure. So Kayhan Space, we began in 2019 and are kind of like to ship ourselves as a space situational awareness software company. So the idea being space situational awareness, sounds like kind of a mouthful, but the idea is really just pursuing spaceflight safety for satellites by being aware of potential risks to your spacecraft as a satellite operator, right? So whether that's collisions or whatever it may be, space situational awareness is the pursuit of flying spacecraft safely. So like I mentioned, we founded the company in 2019. Well, I was around, but I was not a founder. So I was employee number one into Kayhan Space, along with our CEO Siamak Kassar and CTO Aras Faizi, who I've been actually have known Siamak from a previous job. So we got along well together, and I was serendipitously around for the founding of the company, which has been a pretty wild ride since then. So after that, in 2020, we went through the Techstars Allied Space Accelerator program, startup accelerator, which was huge, kind of getting the ball rolling. Obviously, in 2020, everything was pretty turbulent in the tech industry and just kind of at large in the world. But we managed to get through that, and in 2021, we completed our seed round funding with Root Ventures and Overline VC. That kind of really jump-started our hiring process and allowed us to build up to, in 2022, we released our first two kind of flagship products. So those being Kayhan Pathfinder, which is our space traffic coordination platform for satellite operators to analyze conjunction information and basically mitigate the risk of colliding into other spacecraft or debris or anything like that in space, as well as Kayhan Gamut, which is our launch collision avoidance service. So for launch missions, coming from the Earth's surface, how do you get into space without hitting anything on the way there is essentially the problem statement there. So that's a little bit about Kayhan. Looking forward to talking more.
Cool. Well, same questions, I guess, as for Ben, like head count at this point, where you all currently stand?
Yeah. So the company is based in Boulder, Colorado, but we actually are a hybrid organization. So I work in Eugene, Oregon. We have folks scattered all across the U.S. Right now, we run a little bit of a smaller ship. So I think we're right around the 20 head count at the moment, mostly distributed in engineering. In terms of funding, we raised that seed round in 2021 that I mentioned, and nothing more to report there, but looking forward to news coming out in the future.
Yeah, I don't think I knew that you guys came through the Techstars accelerator program. That's really neat.
Yeah, we've had relationships with a few different startup accelerator programs, including I should have came prepared with the names off the top of my head. A few related to AWS, Hyperspace Challenge, but Techstars Allied Space was our first big introduction to the world of startup accelerators, which was a new experience for me. It was definitely a big adjustment, but I think it was a great experience. So definitely recommend it.
And we'll certainly have some questions about being first in engineering hire. That's always a fascinating story in itself. But let's stay on topic here. Let's jump into one of the first points here. So Ben, when we talk about some of these different challenges that commercial startups will face when innovating in the space tech industry, what are some of these challenges? And I guess how is Quantum addressing these challenges? How are other companies addressing these challenges?
So I don't want to imply that space is the hardest industry, but we do have some unique challenges that some others don't. And I'll give the example I like to give with that is self-driving cars. If you think you got great software, great sensors for a self-driving car, you buy a couple of cheap cars and you go to a field. And if you crash into a tree, well, does anybody care? Does anybody know? So you can crash into 100 trees as you develop your prowess in all the necessary technologies. If you're a space company and you need to pay for a rocket launch into space, now you're talking, easily millions of dollars, if not tens of millions of dollars, and some people pay hundreds of millions of dollars just to get to the location that you want to operate in, as opposed to driving into a field. And then you turn the thing on. And if there's a bad day, you may need to restart and do that over again. And so there is a capital barrier to entry to get flight-proven systems. And many government agencies are reticent to invest in your product without being flight-proven. And so there's this area between, we've developed it on the ground, it hasn't gone to space yet, and that in space world known as the Valley of Death. And it is very difficult for some companies to cross the Valley of Death. Some aren't able to do it. Some are able to do it if you're software only or very small sensors that can ride along where you're not critical to the functioning of the larger spacecraft. It's a little bit easier. And so there are ways to nibble at it. And as I'm not suggesting that everybody goes through the same hurdles, but that's kind of a unique challenge that all space companies face. And then, COVID gave us the same challenges that a lot of industries had, although I must say, in some regards, COVID was less challenging for us because the time span in round terms, to design, develop, build, test, and launch a satellite, it's hard to do it less than 2 years. So 3 or 4 years might be the more typical program length. So if there's a world pandemic that takes the world down for 1 year, what is that in a 4-year cycle? Right. So I know it destroyed some businesses completely, and I feel terrible for those individuals. So the space industry did not suffer some of the terrible causes that the pandemic did cause, but we have our own unique challenges. So,
mm-hmm. and so you all are building satellites. Do you have any currently that are out that have been launched?
We do not. We are using our funding to develop those satellites, mm-hmm. As I said, in that 2, 3, 4 year process. So we're a year and a half into that process. So we are not yet at the buying a rocket stage. So that's a year or two into our future, looking at that macro time scale. Stay tuned. We will be having additional news about launches coming out shortly, but nothing quite yet to announce.
Okay. So Derek, why don't you fill us in a little bit more from like a building perspective, right? You're building software here. What kind of challenges are you up against? And, maybe, for your customers, what makes this a little bit unique or different from, maybe a fintech software or something along those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main thing that I think we ran into as a young company and continue to, constantly kind of see as a challenge going forward, and I think a lot of space companies will agree, is basically just availability of data, right? Data is kind of the lifeblood of any software company, obviously, but I would say especially so in space, almost like Ben was talking about earlier, how we have kind of everyone else's challenges, but kind of compounded by just the complexity of space, right? So specifically talking about data, data is really hard to come by, especially in the space industry, and reliable data at that. So, and when I say data, I'm really talking about relative to Kayhan Space, what we do is predict and try to mitigate the risk of collisions, right? And so that's all about predicting what's going to happen in the future, right? But predictions are based on observations, right? They're based on observations of reality that are extrapolated into the future. And if those observations are not of high quality, or if you don't have very many of them, it's really difficult to make those accurate predictions into the future. And if that's your business, then it's important to get and have access to a lot of high quality observation data. And that's something that's very expensive if you want to purchase from commercial data providers. So there's whole companies whose whole business is basically operating sensors, telescopes, things like that, whether they're on the ground or in space, for observing the positions of satellites in orbit, tracking data as we refer to it. Or also the U.S. government is a huge data provider in and of itself. They operate, the U.S. DoD, Department of Defense, runs a huge sensor network called the Space Surveillance Network that, for the purposes of U.S. and allied nations spaceflight safety, collects and distributes a bunch of data. But each one of those comes with its own challenges. I mean, government provided data is subject to export controls. A lot of it is classified, or at least the good quality data is classified and kind of difficult to get your hands on, especially if you don't have a big network, right? If you're a small company, you're just getting started, it can be really difficult to kind of get your hands on the materials, the raw materials needed to produce these kind of high quality products that you want to sell to customers that people need, right? I mean, one of the things Ben was talking about earlier is that barrier to entry for spaceflight companies to build spacecraft. And one of those barriers to entry that Kayhan observes is the ability to fly your spacecraft safely and be confident that you'll see risks coming up in terms of spaceflight safety. So we want to reduce the barrier of entry to this product, or to this, reduce the barrier of entry to flying your spacecraft safely. And one of the big challenges that we observe is access to those tracking information to actually make those predictions.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It all seems like it's also moving very fast right now. There's a lot that's changed over the last 10 plus years here. Let's touch on some of those things, Ben, that you've seen. Some of this transition maybe from a lot more of these private companies like SpaceX that are popping up. Where has this shift gone from that you've seen with like the historical role of the government in space exploration, and how it's evolved now with a lot more commercial companies getting involved?
Yeah. In the early days, back 50, 60 years ago, basically, the government was the dominant influence in all space missions. And today it's only dominant in most. There's the famous line in the Apollo 13 movie where they're asking the manufacturer of the lunar module, can you do this thing we need it to do? Hey, we weren't signed up to do that. Grumman only built it to land on the surface of the moon. Well, we know that, but can it do this other thing? So Grumman was around. It helped build the lunar lander. So it's not that contractors haven't been around for a while. They've been around since the beginning. But the big shift is for the first 4 or 5 decades, they basically did what the government asked them to do. And very few, but few overall commercial space companies were completely independent of government contracts. The one notable exception would be communication satellites, geosynchronous communication satellites. Fast forward to today, the cost of launch has come down. It's still crazy high, but it has come down, and that has allowed venture-backed commercial companies like myself to move ahead with plans, not in absence of trying to win government contracts, but not wholly dependent upon. And I guess because I have 4 kids that were just recently teenagers, and one still is, my metaphor is in the beginning, commercial space industry was like a child living with a parent. The parent was the government. They did some independent things. They would ride their bike to the pool and come back without the parents, as a 12-year-old. But they came back home at the end of the night. Now, the commercial space industry is no longer a teenager. It's now a 20-year-old, and they're just doing things completely independent of the government. The government is still the single largest owner-operator of satellites in space. The U.S. government is. But there are some companies that are moving out, could care less what what the government is doing. So there is this evolution of capabilities and funding to generate those capabilities that just didn't exist in decades past. And I think the future is bright. The greatest things happen when commercial industries and the government work together to do things. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. Everyone says, wow, this is the most exciting time in space. Well, every decade people say that because it's evolving, and it is only growing and growing. So I think our brightest, our golden eras are still in front of us, not behind us. I'm very bullish on the commercial space future.
Yeah, that's exciting. I know that an easy one to point out would be, I guess, the usage of reusable rockets, kind of decreasing that cost of launching payloads into space. But you've touched on something as well, Derek, about within like the Department of Defense. What kind of use cases are you seeing as the most viable for your all software, and I guess how are you prioritizing like where your best product market fit is?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, going along with what Ben was saying, a lot of the narrative around this topic is that the shift from the U.S. government as controlling the space industry to the commercial spaceflight operators. And I think while that's an important conversation, it's definitely good to keep in mind that, as Ben was saying, right on, the U.S. government is still a huge, the biggest player in the space, right? And so we feel that, or at least I personally feel that. The key to success in this world is kind of figuring out how to balance those two, right? If you're trying to sell spaceflight safety software or any software that has to do with this kind of wild west that we're talking about with the modern space industry, you'll have to interact with both entities, right? With commercial entities who are as Ben was saying, who kind of couldn't care less how the U.S. government is operating. They're caring less and less every year, but also acknowledging that the U.S. government is a huge source of funding for U.S. commercial companies who want to sell software products, and that also not only that in terms of funding, maybe a less cynical point of view would be the U.S. government and the entities within it are the origins of some of the most of the foundation that commercial spaceflight safety or spaceflight industry are built on, right? All the algorithms and things like that have their roots, or many of them do, in research and missions flown by the U.S. government, NASA, NOAA, all of those kind of organizations, and obviously the DoD. So, long-winded way of getting to your question is, I think we definitely want to balance selling our products to both individual small operators, who are commercial, who are not really worried about the national security missions or anything like that flown by the U.S. government, who are just have a small, easy to understand business model, because they need the barrier of entry, lowered to like flying their missions safely, but as well acknowledging that there's a huge opportunity for the U.S. government as well as a customer for us. And one last thing I want to mention on that topic too is that even with the U.S. government, a lot of the responsibility and the day-to-day operations of spaceflight are even shifting within the U.S. government, not just from it. So a good example of that is the TRAX, or Traffic Coordination System for Space program, that's being undertaken as part of this shift from spaceflight safety responsibility from the Department of Defense to the Department of Commerce in the U.S. government. So that's a huge kind of seismic shift in the big players in a lot of one of the kind of big topics in that space is space traffic management, right? How do you manage all of these spacecraft kind of all operating independently? So I just wanted to highlight too that the shift is going on not just between the government and commercial worlds, but within the U.S. government itself, and that has a big impact on how we should operate as commercial entities.
And that touches a little bit on like what I was going to ask about. So I get it, and I think Ben, you mentioned it, the idea that like, okay, commercial is caring less and less about what the government want, the need there, but I'm sure the government still cares a lot about the commercial space and making sure that people are operating safely and securely. I think back to, I don't know, I'm sure that I read some sci-fi thing when I was a kid about how we all got trapped on the planet because like all these satellites collided and then like it was just chaos, because you couldn't leave, couldn't go to orbit.
Well, I would say the government cares for two reasons. They care for two reasons. One, they want less expensive stuff, right?
Yeah.
Why? There's a little phrase that the Space Force says a lot: buy it if you can, and only build it if you must, right? And right, if they care about tax dollars as much as we do, and so they definitely care greatly about what commercial companies like Kayhan and Quantum are doing, so they can buy commercial services and not have to build a bespoke system themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they care about that. And they also care because the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which I know you guys keep under your pillow at night.
I was just reading it, actually, just as a refresher.
States that launching states are responsible for, launch supervision and then launch authorization and continual supervision of every space asset. And so, before you put anything into space, you have to go to multiple government agencies to get authorization to launch. And this is true. This is true worldwide. And so the governments definitely care what commercial companies are doing for both those reasons.
Yeah, it's great to hear about the venture capital side of things. Obviously, needed for the commercial startup side of the next wave of companies innovating. It sounds like also, we're tracking a lot of these, smaller satellites. It's almost like a miniaturization of satellites being launched. So it's creating obviously a supply and demand thing, right? So the more satellites that are getting pushed out, there's going to be a demand for many more companies to help them with like navigating, not colliding with one another and so forth. So love to see, a little bit more of that increase happening in the space. I did want to, spend some of the remaining time here talking about, a lot of folks super interested and intrigued on how to tap into this industry. So hearing it firsthand from you all. So Derek, let's start with you here on this. I know that you mentioned that you had a connection with the founders from a previous past life, but when you all are hiring engineers and looking for talent, what is it that you're kind of looking for from a skill set perspective? What kind of a experience do you really kind of prioritize that you think would flourish in this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the biggest thing I want to encourage folks who are looking to break into kind of the space software industry, and I kind of applied it right there, is that intersectionality, right? Or interdisciplinary nature of it, right? I mean, as Ben was saying, everything we do in space flight is a difficult problem, but they're actually also difficult for a couple of different reasons that are related to both software and aerospace engineering kind of in tandem. So what I'm always looking for candidates who kind of demonstrate that at least they're willing to kind of really deeply dig into both of those dual aspects of the job, right? I mean, every problem that we solve when we're building spaceflight software of any kind is both a very complex engineering problem in and of itself for software engineers to solve, but also has a lot of complexity just in the domain specific, problems that we're solving in aerospace itself. So candidates who are either have experience or even just show a willingness to kind of dig into the problem that they're passionate about, space flight and space in general, and understanding those deep problems. I think that's the number one thing that I would communicate. Not everyone's going to be able to get an MS in software and aerospace engineering. That's what we call a unicorn candidate in tech, I guess. But we're not looking for those people necessarily, as so much as people who demonstrate a strength, but also an interest in the other aspect.
Awesome. Yeah, Ben, I'm going to flip the same question to you over at Quantum Space. What is it that you all are really interested in when you're talking to folks?
Yeah, I think Derek hit it. It's hard to train passion, right? If you get somebody who's passionate about what they do, that is worth a tremendous amount. In particular, I'll only speak for my company. The willingness to be along the journey, the wayfinding journey, right? There are some companies that build widgets, and they've been doing it for years. And when you join that company, you're going to be building more widgets. That is not yet the case with our company. We have a North Star vision to provide essential services to entities going into geo and cislunar space. But the specific path, what we're going to be working on next month, it might change slightly. And that, that's called wayfinding, right? You get to the top of the mountain, but there's a tree right in front of you. Well, you go around the tree. So for a brief period of time, you're not going directly towards the top of the mountain, you're going orthogonal to it. So having an employee or a candidate when we interview them that is comfortable with a bit of wayfinding because they know the North Star vision is worth it and the reward is going to be there to be part of something greater than themselves, to be part of a new company that's growing. But willing to be along the journey for that wayfinding. Those are two big aspects that we look for when we do our hiring.
I'm curious, Ben, you touched on this earlier about the timeline it takes for some of these projects to go. And I think that's probably another area that's very different between some of the other spaces, right? And like I worked with a guy, his first job was at Garmin. And he was like, it took forever, like every change, like there were 15 tests that needed to be updated and months and months and months of testing before like anything happened. And I'm curious, like, is that still sort of the case? I assume it is.
Yeah, that's a super insight. I have good friends of mine who, like I mentioned, I worked at Goddard and I staged a prop for the video. You see my Hubble Space Telescope over my shoulder. I worked on the last 3 Hubble Servicing Missions. When I first joined NASA, that's what I did the first 12 years. I worked the first 3 Hubble Servicing Missions, and that was the first 10 years, 2009 to 1999 to 2009. And I was super lucky. In 10 years, I had 3 missions under my belt. I know people that joined working James Webb Space Telescope. They worked on that project for 25 years, and then they had their first launch.
Right.
Now, there's a lot of milestones along the way. We passed this test. We passed this milestone. We passed this other milestone. But if you're looking for those really big payoffs in the space business, you got to bide your time sometimes and look at the wonderful payoff that the Webb employees got when that thing got to orbit. So I can't imagine their relief when that rocket succeeded and that liftoff.
Right.
And then all the deployments.
But is that something that you sort of interview, like when you're talking to candidates, are you trying to gauge like their that sort of ability to deal with that, I guess is sort of my question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that it's an interview question to say, are you comfortable with not getting a launch for a year? Most people we interview are somewhat familiar with the aerospace business, and so that is a very good insight. But yeah, that doesn't really come up in the interview. Maybe that's just implicit,
right?
When they apply to work for a space company, that the big milestones might be years apart.
Right.
Yeah, probably not. Talking to the B2C app, flippers out there. Cool. Let's. I guess I just have one more question before we jump into the final segment. So just from your all's research and what you're hearing out there, what are some of any future trends in this industry that you're keen to, or that you're really cued in on? Any future trends in the space tech industry that you'd like to share or you're getting excited about?
I've got one, right off the top of my head, which is kind of relates to what I was talking about with the TRACS program with the U.S. government, the traffic coordination system, and really it's about coordination between satellite operators, right? So space traffic coordination, I guess, is the terminology we would use. Basically just having kind of establishing the precedent that spaceflight operators are talking to one another and coordinating for the purpose of spaceflight safety. I think is it's a huge industry shift that's kind of happening right now, and part of those. There's a lot of commercial companies like ourselves who are very invested in this process, but also, as I mentioned, the U.S. government is keenly aware of the problem and putting a lot of resources into developing, systems and tools and all of that stuff to, address the problem. So I think it's very important that we kind of face it head on and really think, not just how we can solve this problem as it exists today, but, as you guys were talking about, as in 5 years and 10 years, as the population of especially LEO in particular grows more and more, how can we establish systems now that are going to be, still reliable and robust and scalable up to the point when we have many, many more spacecraft and businesses, individual businesses and entities trying to all operate in this, shared space environment.
And maybe just to clarify for listeners that aren't cued in, LEO means
low Earth orbit. Yeah. So basically the closest things to Earth that are above, the Kallman line or considered in space.
Yeah, just comment on LEO for a second, because I speak to a lot of school groups. Again, pointing to Hubble over my shoulder, which is about at the same altitude as the International Space Station. When Hubble passes overhead here in Washington, D.C., it's closer to D.C. than driving from here to New York City.
Wow.
Right? Low Earth orbit is pretty darn low. Right? It is like low. It is only hundreds of miles up. And then, you can go way out. The moon is 250,000 miles, and things start really getting far away after that. So yeah, LEO is pretty low.
That's fascinating. And then you all are also doing a lot of work between, the Earth and moon and the moon. Is that right? Ben? Okay.
Yeah. So the trends, sorry.
Yeah. So trends that you're excited about or you're picking up on.
Yeah. So mobility. Mobility is desired for a lot of folks. So Kepler is first discovered the motions of the planets by Keplerian motion. And what's the magic of a Keplerian motion is it takes no energy to stay in it. Right? Once you get trapped in once you are in the Keplerian orbit, it takes no energy. The flip side of that is if you want to do anything but stay in that orbit, you need to spend energy. You need to expend propellant out of the back end to make yourself go forward, right? Equal and opposite. So for the first 60 years, 99% of every satellite gets into a Keplerian orbit and just stays there for its entire life, and then it gets retired or turns into a piece of debris. But people are envisioning missions where they want to have mobility. They want to move. They want to change orbits. And a propellant tank on a spacecraft is sometimes really big. It's a huge percent. I think a geosynchronous orbit spacecraft, half of the launch mass, half of the weight of that thing sitting on the launch pad is fuel. And that goes into a Keplerian orbit and stays there the rest of its life. And so you can imagine if you wanted to have the flexibility to move your satellite around to collect more science, to do more exploration, or to figure out what the bad guys are up to, that requires fuel, that requires propellant. And so there's a big trend in the industry, a big macro trend where lots of government agencies, what I used to do when I was with NASA before I left, was work on robotic refueling. So the ability to refuel the satellite, to give it more life, to give it more mobility, it gives generals and scientists and astronauts alike the ability to do more things in space. It is not commonplace today. Only one thing is routinely refueled, and that's the International Space Station. Everything else, it's a crazy one-off, or it never gets refueled at all. 99.9999% of all satellites will die with the single load of fuel they had when they launched. But ask me again in 5 years and again in 10 years, and that percent is going to start to swing the other direction.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could chime in on that mobility topic too, because I think it's also really important. Two things. So there's one, I think it's a huge industry trend. There's a lot of commercial companies also working on this problem. Shout out to OrbitFab, who's a friend of Kayhan Space. So it's definitely an active field that's being developed. And also, I also want to tie back to spaceflight safety. Ben mentioned a lot of mission specific, use cases for having, propellant on the spacecraft to expend, collecting more science or whatever it may be. But another huge use case for mobility on a spacecraft is for avoiding, mitigating the risk of conjunction, right? That's something that we deal with all the time. We have a lot of, run into a lot of cases where operators have a spacecraft. We can predict the conjunction, but they can't mitigate the risk of that conjunction because the spacecraft isn't maneuverable. So that's another huge kind of trend in the industry that I think we should really try and pursue, is having more spacecraft be maneuverable, not only for their own benefit for science, but also for mitigating the risk of conjunctions.
I like that you use conjunction instead of collision.
Yeah, we like to keep it theoretical when we're talking about satellites colliding. We keep it very much in the theoretical space.
Yeah. Think about that next time you're on the DC Beltway.
Yeah.
It's a conjunction, officer, I promise.
Well said. All right, well let's close out here with our final segment. So we're going to transition to a segment that we call the 5-second scramble. So this is where we're going to do a rapid fire Q&A with both of our guests, some business, some personal. Try to answer within 5 seconds. If you can, goes over, we won't air horn you or anything like that. So let's start with you, Ben. Are you ready?
Go.
All right. What is your favorite part of the culture at Quantum Space?
Camaraderie, working together as a team.
Nice. What kind of technologist thrives at Quantum Space?
Willingness to tackle new things, even if it's not what they were trained or brought into the company to do.
What traits do you value most in your co-founders?
I would say their ethics and their passion.
What can our listeners be excited about with Quantum Space in 2024 and beyond?
Getting our spacecraft in orbit and providing all the services I mentioned earlier to them.
Nice. What aspects of your culture do you most fear losing with growth?
That's a great question. Fear losing with growth. I guess a sense of camaraderie. Go back to that, right? It's harder in larger companies to know everyone by name and all the details of their lives. So that's something that I'd be ashamed to see go away.
Okay. Describe your ideal breakfast meal.
Oh, I'm a big breakfast guy. Normally it's just cold cereal, but I'm down for 2 runny eggs, sausage, toast, and a cup of coffee.
Just describe the Grand Slam at dinner.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
What's something that you are good at but you hate doing?
Good at, but I hate doing. Well, I'm not going to say picking up after my dogs. Let's see. I would say I guess maybe writing proposals. I'm a pretty good writer, but I don't say that I relish it before I begin.
I think many would agree with you in the proposal writing space.
Yeah.
What if you could live in a fictional world from a book or movie? Which one would you choose?
Let's see. I guess Star Wars. Yeah, I'm a big Star Wars fan.
Right on theme here as well. What is the worst fashion trend that you ever followed?
The worst fashion? Well, I have no hair now, but as a kid, my hair is very wavy, but all my friends had long hair. So I tried to follow them and I looked like Bozo the Clown. It just went straight out instead of down. But I kept it for a long time and I should have seen the writing on the wall.
We'll post those pictures in the show notes after the fact. What was your dream job as a kid?
I worked 4 years on a university grounds crew cutting grass. And it doesn't seem like a lot of fun to be in the hot sun in North Carolina cutting grass, but I had a great group of guys that I worked with. And you're outdoors every day, cutting down a tree or doing something, like that. And that was a lot of fun. That's
great. What, last question here, hypothetical. If you were traveling to Mars for a nice little vacation, what are 3 possessions from home that you would have to take with you?
3 possessions from home that I got to take with me. Let's see, I guess my Star Wars collection of movies. I'm a chili head. I love crazy hot salsa and hot sauce. So I got to bring a bottle of something too hot, other than a drop at a time. And I got to have chips to go with that, right? You got to have the chips and the salsa together. So that's what I'll go with.
Is there room for me?
Yeah. Yeah, movies, chips, and salsa. I mean, I'm in. Let's go to Mars. That's great. I've actually been following a little bit of a trend. It was from a pairing on the show, which is chips and hot sauce. Just like dabbling a little hot sauce on the chips versus traditional salsa. I think they're using like Tapatio or something, not too intense, but sounds like you've got a serious heat factor that you're working with, Ben.
Yeah, my nephews cajoled me into doing that with Satan's blood. Oh. And so me and all my 2 boys and all my nephews, we all did Satan's blood on a chip, and that was pretty painful.
Just fried your taste buds.
Yeah, good times. Good times.
All right, good stuff. That's a wrap for you. You're all set. Let's jump over to you, Derek. You ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
All right. Explain Kayhan Space to me as if I were a 5-year-old.
Don't crash your satellite. Do it this way instead.
How would you describe your culture?
Close knit. I would say we're all really good friends.
Excellent. What kind of technologist thrives at Kayhan Space?
I would say someone who is opinionated, but rational and willing to accept when we've come to the final, product that everyone agrees on.
What can folks be most excited about for Kayhan heading into 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, new features for sure. Definitely collaborations as well.
Excellent. What if you could have any superpower? What would it be and why?
Ooh, superpower. Yeah. Maybe green thumb superpower to go with my gardening. Get some bigger tomatoes.
There you go. What we're gonna keep with the Mars theme here. So if you were gonna establish the first fast food restaurant on Mars, what are you picking?
Ooh, well, I'm a vegetarian, so I'm not going burger. Maybe we'll go with some onion rings. Yeah, Martian onion rings.
Nice. Okay, I could get behind that. What's something that you like to do but you're not very good at?
Ooh, good question. Let's see. Something I like to do but I'm not very good at. Maybe running. Yeah, just like exercising in general, maybe is really what I was going for there. Always feels good after I'm doing it, but boy, am I sad while I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's I agree on that. What's a charity or a corporate philanthropy that's near and dear to you?
Ooh, yeah. Well, in my local area, we have the Mackenzie River Trust, which is basically for maintaining the wild area around the Mackenzie River in Oregon, which is I'm definitely very passionate about.
Awesome. What's something that you're very afraid of?
Dying. Yeah, just mortality in general for any reason.
Might be the number one answer on the board.
Yeah. I bet you haven't gotten that one before, though. Keep it simple.
Who is the who is your greatest superhero of all time?
It's got to be Spider-Man. Yeah, I'm a big Spider-Man fan. I just watched the new animated Into the Spider-Verse or Across the Spider-Verse. Excellent movie.
It's good. Yeah, we get Batman, Spider-Man, top two answers there. So that's it. And that's a wrap. That was a good one. That was fun. I appreciate you guys dropping by and spending time with us. We're both excited to keep tracking the innovative work that your companies are doing. And again, appreciate you spending time with us on the pod.
Thanks for having us.
It's been tremendous fun. Thanks so much for inviting me.